This is the second of my revision videos. This revision video is based upon command words. Now, command words are words that tell you what to do in the exam. Each question will have one specific word that you will need to know, gives you an instruction as to how you will answer the question. So they could be describe, explain, examine. We're going to visit each of those command words, and I'm going to give you some practical solutions and some ideas as to how you would apply those command words in the exam. First command word that could be used in the examination is something that could be said in various different ways. It would be name, give, identify, or state, and you can see those on the slide. There's a definition of what the command word requires you to do, but I'm going to exemplify it using a diagram. So they could give you a diagram in the exam, or they may not give you a diagram, and they may ask you to name or state two causes of flooding. Now, obviously in this diagram you can see that one of the causes of flooding would be heavy rainfall, so you could state it literally as the two words heavy rainfall. Another cause of flooding shown in this diagram would be urbanisation. You wouldn't need to explain that urbanisation means the area of land is covered in tarmac, stopping water from running off the land. You would just state urbanisation causes flooding. The next command word that we deal with is define. Again, there's a definition of what define actually means to a geographer. Define actually simply asks you to say what something means. Very similar to the 2-mark questions that you find in the RE examination. So here you could be asked in the examination without a diagram or with a diagram to define lag time. And here obviously the definition is written, time between peak rainfall and peak discharge. You don't need to worry too much here about writing full sentences, as long as you include the key geographical language in your answer, and in your definition you'll always get 2 marks. The next command word is what we call describe. This is the most common command word in exams, and there will certainly be one describe question in each of the sections of your exam. This requires you to give the main characteristics of something. So again, if we look at a diagram to exemplify how a describe question would work. So a describe question that could relate to floodplains in the rivers topic would be describe the features of a floodplain. So you would look at this diagram or think back to this diagram in the exam, and of course what you need to do is state and give the main features of something. So you could say a floodplain is made up of a wide, flat area that surrounds the river that floods on a regular basis. You could say that a floodplain also features levees, which is a build-up of rocks next to the river. So you're just describing in detail the features. Rather like if you were asked to describe a person, you would describe their skin colour, their hair, and their eye colour. The next command word that we come on to is what we call explain. Again, this is a very common command word, and you certainly will see this command word in a number of your GCSE exam questions. This will usually be a command word that is used for a 4, 6 or even an 8-mark question in the exam. So you need to be able to go into more depth with this command word. It's asking you to give reasons as to why something occurs. So in its most simple form, I would like you again to think of describing someone. If you are asked to describe them, you say what their features are. They have blonde hair, blue eyes, and white skin. If you were to explain that, you would obviously have to say that the genetics of their parents means that they have blonde hair, blue eyes, and pale skin. You could also say that perhaps they live somewhere where they don't get too brown. You can explain the reason for the colour of their skin, the colour of their hair. So, applying this to a geographical theme is obviously very important. So here I would like to relate it to explain the reasons for changes in landforms in the river. So obviously, in order to explain changes in landforms, you need several landforms to write about. So here, for example, you could write about how in the upper course of the river there are waterfalls, and in the lower course of the river there are floodplains. You can't just state what those features are. You will get some marks for stating what those features are. You need to explain why they occur in the different courses of the river. So you need to explain that waterfalls occur in the upper course of the river because there is mostly vertical erosion and hydraulic action, which erodes rocks in a very aggressive and vertical fashion, creating features like waterfalls. And the key here is to say whereas in the lower course of the river you find floodplains. The main cause of a floodplain is a different process called deposition, which deposits material and creates wide, flat areas of land in the river's course. This explanation of why the features in the upper course and the lower course of the river are different is what would always get you 6 marks out of 6. The next command word is a relatively common one. It's compare. Comparing something is saying the things that are different about, is comparing two things is saying the things that are different about them and the things that are similar about them. So again, if you think back to the analogy of comparing two different people, I'd like you to perhaps imagine myself comparing myself to Mr. Gardner, let's say. So for example, you could say that Mr. Gardner and Mr. Lee are both white, they are both male. However, you could compare them in terms of how they are different. So you could say Mr. Lee is 6'3", whereas Mr. Gardner is approximately 6 foot. They are different in height. That is a comparison between two different things. So, again, we can compare the upper course of the river and the middle course of the river. And of course, we could even compare it with the lower course of the river. So, for this question, compare the courses of the river, or compare the upper course and the middle course of the river. You could say, in the upper course of the river, the material that the river carries is large and jagged, and the river is steep in gradient. You could say, therefore, to compare it, whereas in the middle course of the river, the gradient is shallower, the material that the river carries is smaller and finer, and the area of land surrounding the river is flat, whereas in the upper course it is steep. Words like whereas will help make comparisons between two different things much more simple for you. Another word that perhaps won't be a command word in the exam, but it's something that I want you to be aware of. At any point in an examination, when you draw a diagram, you must annotate the diagram. You must not just label the diagram, you must annotate it. This means you have to give descriptive and explanatory labels to the diagram. So you must say, if you are labeling this diagram of a floodplain here, you must not just say floodplain or alluvium or river. You must say river, and then next to it with a little colon you can put river eroding the shape of the valley into a large wide area. Or you could say alluvium, colon, built up over thousands of years from floods. This is what annotation is. And even if the examination does not ask you to annotate diagrams, any point when you draw a diagram in the exam, you must annotate it fully. This is an example here of a fully annotated diagram. The next word that is a recent but very, very common word in the GCSE geography examinations is examine. Now, obviously, if you go to a doctor or to a nurse and you have some kind of medical problem with yourself, they are going to give you an examination. An examination means taking a closer look at something. In order to do that, the doctor or the nurse has to use certain equipment, and they have to be descriptive in terms of what they say, what is wrong with you. They also need to compare what is wrong with you with other conditions that could be wrong with you, and they need to come up with some kind of conclusion that allows you to get the correct medication to treat what is wrong with you. That is what a full medical examination is. And I'd like you to think about the command word in an exam when it asks you to examine something. You need to take a very close look at it. You need to perhaps weigh up two sides of an argument, or think about the positives and negatives of something, or think about the social and economic impacts of something. And you need to examine properly. You must come to a conclusion that says which of those things is most severe, most effective as a course of action, or most destructive. So, for example, there could be a question in the examination that says, examine the effects of a flood in an MEDC, or examine the effects of flooding in a location you have studied, or examine the effects of flooding. Here, you absolutely must write about case study information as well. An examine or an explain question always requires you to write about case studies that you have learnt. So, of course, our rivers case study for flooding is the Sheffield flood of 2007. So the question is, examine the effects of the flooding in a location you have studied. So you would start off by saying, I studied the location of Sheffield, which flooded in 2007. There were both economic and social impacts of the flooding. One of the main economic impacts of the flooding was the flooding of Sheffield Wednesday Football Club. This cost the football club millions of pounds to repair, and it also cost them a huge amount of money in lost ticket sales. Whereas there were also social effects of the flood in 2007. Thousands of homes were flooded, and people had to pay for the damages that were caused to their homes. They also had to evacuate their homes so that they could stay in places that were safe from the flooding. This was, of course, a social impact. However, the economic impact, and this is the real crux of the examine point, is summing up. So you could say, however, the economic impacts of the flooding were far more significant. To further state this, Meadow Hill Shopping Centre was flooded to such an extent that it was closed for up to 3 weeks, and furthermore it cost the shopping centre millions of pounds to repair all of the damage that the flooding was caused. Therefore, I can conclude that the economic impacts of the flooding outweigh the social impacts. So, what we've summarised there is some of the command words that could easily be used in your examination. I hope you found this revision video useful. If you ever come across a GCSE question in your revision and you do not know how to answer it, you can come back to this video to listen to the advice about each of the command words and find out exactly how you would tackle that particular GCSE question. Please make sure that you subscribe so that you get notifications of my next video. Please share this video with your friends from school and make sure that you are using your various resources that you have to revise for any upcoming mock examinations that you might have. Thanks very much.